Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Mader, the Director of Transition Projects here at the Federation for Children with Special Needs, and welcome to Linked Over Lunch. Today's guest is Jennifer Stewart, the statewide Transition Director for the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. I'm going to let Jennifer introduce herself for a minute here.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I actually used to work at the Federation and help with transition projects and I think developing Linked Over Lunch. So anyways, very excited to be here and to talk about pre-employment transition services.
So, Jennifer, why should parents and professionals know about mass rehab and in pre-employment transition services?
Sure. So it's pretty exciting. Over the past year or so, MRC has really been redesigning and thinking about pre-employment transition services. So Mass Rehab Commission is a state agency here in Massachusetts that typically has been thought about as an adult service agency, right? So we have vocational rehabilitation, helping individuals with disabilities around employment supports if they're ready for a job, or community living also is a division that supports people more around independent living, assistive technology. So great resources, but really to be thought about as adult services. And we've changed our model for pre-employment transition services to really focus on students while they're in high school, right? And almost focusing on that student as young as 14. So we're excited as this new model rolls out. As of July 1st, we're rolling out this new model as to what will be the impact as we focus on students and helping them to prepare for work and how that will maybe influence their post-secondary outcomes, whether it may be they're more prepared to get that job on their own or they're more prepared to work with a VR counselor when they exit high school. So that's why I'm here today. I want you to be aware that this is not about adult services necessarily. This is a new opportunity for students while they're in high school.
So what are pre-employment transition services, or what we call in the field PreETS?
Sure. So pre-employment transition services are defined by the law, which is Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. So defined by the law, and I have my infographic here that MRC developed to help demonstrate that there's 5 services. So we have job exploration counseling, counseling in post-secondary education and training, work-based learning experiences, self-advocacy and peer mentoring, and work readiness training. So these are the 5 services that are sort of encompassing what pre-employment transition services are. And as you can tell, these are all sort of around helping to prepare a student, whether it's to get to know themselves better, right, or to get the skills that they need to be successful in a job placement. So when we're talking about PreETS, it's not about, a student coming to us and saying, I want a job. It's about how can we prepare you to be successful in employment. And so that is sort of a shift with our PreETS model, is that we're really focused on what we call we've developed PreETS tiers. And these tiers are awareness, exploration, and preparation. So how are we sort of along this continuum getting students ready for work within those 5 components?
Okay, so how can students, families, professionals access these PreETS services?
Right, so this is another exciting thing about our model is we really thought about in redesigning this, right? So we reduced the age. So this is for students who are 14 to 22. It's a student with a disability, and so that does require, documentation, whether that's an IEP, 504, or it could just be other medical documentation. This does not actually require a social security number. So we've sort of reduced that barrier to access. And the other thing about accessing these services is that you can connect directly to a PreETS provider. So MRC, in designing this new model, has contracted with 36 PreETS providers across the state. So there's PreETS providers available within each sort of area office, catchment area, right? So MRC has about 20 area offices, and we have anywhere, usually about 3 providers per area office. And what we've also done to help create more of a streamlined access to students is we've connected PreETS providers to schools. So every public high school in Massachusetts has a PreETS provider as a liaison. Right. All of this information is on our website, and so we'll send out the link so you can go on the website, look up the school or look up the area office to find out which PreETS provider is associated with your school. This model is also about choice, though, so we want to make sure that a student doesn't feel sort of restricted to work with that provider if they don't have a good relationship with them. So the model is flexible, and we're wanting to meet students where they're at. So that sort of is about, you know, we have PreETS providers providing these 5 services across the state, and then how you get connected. So I also brought the referral form, one page. Easy. Perfect. Right? Yeah. So how do we fill this out quickly and get connected? So this is also on our website. Again, not a social security numbers is necessary. If a student is under 18, they're going to need a parent signature. Right. And if not, they can sign for themselves. So if you're a school or, you know, a parent or family watching, helping to get this form filled out is a great step number 1, right? So sometimes getting those signatures, we've heard from our school partners that that could be the biggest challenge. So making sure we get this form. And then the other thing we need is to have that documentation that the student does have a disability. Again, this could be an IEP, it could be a 504, or it could be other medical documentation. Okay. So if there's some front end work to help collect that documentation, the referral form and that documentation are what the providers are going to need to take sort of that next step with the student. Okay. I think that's...
So my question is, so with previous services, they had to become eligible for mass rehab services. Right. And with this new model, they're just potentially eligible.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what that will look like with being potentially eligible?
Right, so that is the significant change, is we don't need students to enroll into VR.
Which is a long process.
Which can be a long process, right? And so the goal is, we're really encouraging students, don't apply for VR, stay in what we call this potentially eligible status. And what that is just more of this simple referral.
Right, that's great.
Our recommendation is that students, sort of remain in that status and receive pre-employment transition services while they're in high school. And as they're nearing graduation, so 1 year, from graduation or exit of high school, you would then want to connect to our agency if in fact that student needed support around getting a job or was interested in some extra training or support for post-secondary education. So every high school, similar to having a PreETS provider, also does have a VR counselor liaison. And that person you can access and ask questions about, but they're there sort of that back end, that older student as they're nearing graduation. So our new model is focused on keeping students, in a potentially eligible status, working with our providers to get these work readiness skills. And as they're ready to leave high school and to get that job, that's when you're going to connect to MRC and vocational rehabilitation, if appropriate. Right. One of the exciting things I think about this model is, what if students can simply get the services they need to be prepared for work, and then they get that internship or they get that job on their own, or they can go to college and navigate successfully because they had that counseling or training while they were in high school. So that's, to me, one of the most exciting potential outcomes, is that they might not even need adult services. Right.
As we all know, and the data shows us, that if they have any kind of work experience in high school, it increases their success rates after high school significantly.
Yes.
So that's awesome. So tell me a little bit about what these pre-ETS services look like.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we have asked our providers to provide all 5 pre-ETS services. So they have to provide all 5 of those services. And within those services, we've asked them to develop their curriculum or activities along these pre-ETS tiers. Because one of the values and vision of this model is that this is for students of all abilities, right? So you could be a 14-year-old with a more significant disability, or 16 and maybe higher functioning. The point is, we should never hear, oh, well, that service is not for you. We really want our pre-ETS providers to be utilizing tools of universal design, assistive technology, to make opportunities possible for all students.
That's great.
So that's why we're asking them to develop along the pre-ETS tiers. So awareness, preparation, awareness, exploration, preparation. So students can kind of come in at the level that they are. So providers, every provider is different, and that's
Right.
one of the, I think great things about our model is that we're not giving our providers a standardized curriculum.
Right.
We know that they are creative and have great tools and resources, and we have been doing a lot of training, but each provider is going to offer something different because they also have different staff expertise.
Right, and different strengths.
But in general, our providers are sort of developing what we would see as like a calendar of events or different activities. So after a student connects with a provider, they bring their referral and their disability documentation, and MRC approves services for that student. The provider is going to get to know the student. They're going to do an intake. What are their interests? What are their skills? Where will they sort of fit within our offerings?
Right.
And they'll develop a service plan for that student. So they'll develop a service plan, and this is something that's potentially flexible, and that's what's great about the model is we know students need flexibility.
Right.
Whether it's because of soccer schedule or transportation or needing parents to support them, or potentially needing the school or a different support system to help them while they're accessing the curriculum. So this might mean that they sort of participate in a several week self-advocacy class, and then they come back 6 months later. Right. So it is where we're looking at sort of they can come and they can go, or we're going to have our highly motivated students that really want to partake in everything, and that's excellent as well. So it's going to look different for every student. We don't want to see programming that's sort of, or service plans or offerings of our providers that are sort of cookie cutter, just as we wouldn't want to see that in an IEP. So this is individualized in the sense that service plans should be based on what makes sense for that student. And I'll say along with that, complementary to what's happening in the school. And, I know we're going to talk about that in a second, but it's not duplicating services in the school. This is really to be seen as a benefit. So that's a little bit about the model. Students can access one or more of the 5 services. So they may simply only be 14 years old and not even understand that they have a disability, and they can sort of get connected to the provider, might have a peer mentor who's offering a self-advocacy training. So that's just the great first step. Maybe that student wants to come back when they're 15 and they're ready for sort of another offering and a mix of services. So service plans can change, and students sort of, participation in them as well.
And there's not a time limit on these. Like you can't just participate 1 year and then you're done that year. You can keep coming back.
You can keep coming back as long as you are enrolled in high school. When you leave when you leave high school or post-secondary education or training, no longer are you defined as a student and able to access pre-employment transition services. Great.
So tell me, how is this different from what schools are doing for transition services?
So I think this is, an important topic, and I've been working closely with a colleague of mine at the Department of Ed to write sort of an advisory to both school systems and families so we can just sort of understand this, because the new model is really has a high level of collaboration with schools, because we've sort of removed MRC and the vocational rehabilitation counselor is sort of being in the middle, right? So providers are working directly with schools and trying to figure out, okay, how does this complement what is in a student's IEP, and making sure schools are not feeling that they aren't required to provide that service. So if it's in a student's IEP, the school is still required to provide that service. And MRC and pre-employment transition services should really be seen as a benefit. One of the things that we are pushing and encouraging with our providers is this needs to be unique. This should be a community-based, employer-involved experience for students, right? So it might be schools really see this as this added benefit for how do we figure out how to collaborate and coordinate, because we see the added benefit for the student that school might just not have the capacity to do. So we're going to see variations in this. One of our recommendations always is having that one point of contact. So if you're a school, or even for the PreETS provider, making sure that you have that sort of consistent, streamlined communication, so that you are able to coordinate services, right? So with our providers, we're doing training and about how to sort of have that relationship with the school, right? So go in and identify who's going to be your point of contact. What is your ask of them? How can schools help to identify students so they can access these services? But how can schools maybe open up space so providers can go in and meet with students? Maybe do sort of an awareness level class in the school setting,
right?
Sort of establishing relationships with students to then bring them out into the community,
right?
So that's one of the we're seeing providers sort of start in the school, gain the trust of the student in the school setting, but then almost be that exciting, cool provider that gets to then take them out to do that employer tour, to take them on an informational interview. So those are the sort of complementary services that our PreETS providers are going to be able to provide. I think that there's more to learn around how we can figure out how to collaborate and work together around this, as we have both IDEA and WIOA asking to provide services to students with disabilities. So we can just be excited that the opportunities are both there, but how do we coordinate it all and make it so students' skills are building on each other as well?
I have to tell you how excited I am about these services as a former rehab counselor and someone who helped individuals get jobs, with individuals with disabilities get jobs. I saw many students come to me, and there was a spectrum. There were kids whose schools were really great about teaching them about employment, and then students who had no idea about employment. And we can touch so many people with these services. So many students can have some idea of employment, whether it's just job search, understanding what schooling they need for a job. I mean, those are things that are critical for kids to plan their future, and make sure their vision is something that they can make a reality, or if it's not something they can make a reality, maybe they can find something very near to it that they have the skills to do. And I think that is just so important.
Yeah. No, I'm very excited about the model, and even hearing from one of our PreETS providers, it was the school who said, watching her younger students. So she had a 14 and 15-year-olds that she referred to them, and just watching the change, even just over this 6-week, training program that one of our providers led, that she could see like a light bulb go off, that these students had never maybe thought about themselves as wage earners.
Right.
And to see that these students are now maybe going to see themselves as wage earners, that's very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we need to set the standard high for all of our students. And if they can get some experience and some understanding of work and understand what their skills are and their interests are while they're in high school, they have all of that time to plan. It's great.
Yeah. So we're really excited, and I'm, always happy to answer questions. As a follow-up, I encourage you to go to our website. We've done a pretty comprehensive book that helps to provide information about what is the model, who are our providers. So hopefully you can get that information you need. The referral form is on there. We want people to feel like they know what the model is and they can get connected.
And I'll link all of that stuff in the comments underneath this video stream, so you can click it as easy as possible and reach out if you have any more questions. And I'd like to thank you, Jennifer, for coming and talking with us today.
Love it.
And we'll see you guys next month. Thank you so much.
Bye.